Right, good afternoon everybody. I'm absolutely excited and delighted to be here with you today, and I have to say, Oscar and I, we've been actually doing a little bit of a roadshow together, and this has been a really exciting day today, and we've seen quite a few IR conferences, so what an amazing IR community you are here, and hopefully today I will show you actually why, and I've got some data that actually corroborates how fantastic Turkish IR are, and that you're setting the benchmark, essentially. So very delighted to be here today. For those that don't know us, I'm pretty sure because I've seen quite a few familiar faces, some new faces, but Extel has been around for over 50 years, previously known as Institutional Investor Research, and we're very much known for our rankings that we're producing, but more importantly, the performance evaluation and validation that we're able to deliver to global buy-side, sell-side, and corporates. And we have annually, actually, over 50,000 institutional investors and sell-side analysts and heads of research that contribute every year globally in our corporate executive team research. So it's a large universe that we're tapping into to be able to understand and identify what best in class in investor relations is. And we have some data that actually corroborates that. So all in all, as part of our structure, we provide a three-way feedback loop, so everybody really participates to provide feedback on their counterparts. And that's really important because it's created an environment where we're all trying to raise the standard, to optimize outreach, to optimize engagement, to ensure that you as corporate investor relations officers are able to meet the demands and the expectations of your investors to help them make more informed and better informed investment decisions. So it's a really important part of the work that we're doing, and as part of our corporate engagement, and I hope all of you have received an email from us related to the Corporate Insight Survey, where we ask you as well to rank and rate the buy side and sell side. We're scoping nearly 3,000 corporates every single year, not only to understand what they think of their counterparts on the buy side and sell side and help them get better, but also understand what are you doing in terms of your investor relations efforts, how do you structure your teams, what kind of skill sets are you looking for, how do you upskill, how do you allocate resources, and what your IR budgets look like. So it really encompasses a large scope within the investor relations community and industry, allowing you to have the right insights to actually deliver the right output and at the right standard and quality. Now, a lot of you will have seen this before, but this is basically our metrics in terms of performance metrics that we ask the buy side and sell side to assess you in every single year. We're actually making some adjustments with respect to that for next year, and I will give you some insights around that later on. But this is really the framework that allows us to identify what IR is doing in each of those countries that we're scoping feedback from across the CEO, CFO, board of directors, IR professionals. We look at the IR program broken down by financial disclosure and your communication, down to your business and market knowledge. We heard it earlier, actually, stay away from macro. I actually truly believe that you need to provide a context where you actually fit in within your competitive landscape, and investors need that information from you. And I think these are the type of pieces of information and intelligence that actually create a little bit more glue in your relationship and reinforces that trust that they will have in you in terms of a knowledge source. So we look at ESG as well. This is an area that has actually truly declined a little bit. It's still there because directionally it's still important that you integrate ESG and that you include that as part of your overall communication and disclosure. So this is the framework. The important thing in terms of the methodology is that it's completely independent. So every single year we actually ask the buy side and sell side to rate you across these metrics, but we don't provide them with an index. So they actually physically have to input the name of the company that they wish to assess. So this is the first hurdle and threshold that you need to overcome in terms of being evaluated in here. So you need to have created such level of visibility and traction with your stakeholders that you end up appearing in this survey. So it's really quite difficult if you think about the whole universe of potentially listed entities. So For those companies, and there were 60 companies in Turkey this year that were nominated, job well done. Whether you have actually had a first rank or a 30th rank, I think this is already a big win, and it's a signal that you're doing the right thing in terms of staying on the radar of the investor community. Now, I wanted to share some highlights, and I will break it down into two parts. One area, or one side of the next slides, will basically be looking at how the investor community actually sees Turkey with respect to the peer group within the emerging EMEA survey. So it's very interesting to actually see how, in aggregate, Turkish companies are actually performing across various metrics, but also across their different demographic groupings on their stakeholder universe. And then later on, we'll also be looking at some of the best practice. We heard some best practice earlier. I was told that you have to repeat things 3 times at least for them to stick. So I hope this will stick and stay with you, and for you, give you an opportunity to actually go ahead and implement some of these ideas and concepts. Now, this is really, really important. So you can see that the biggest bar here is representative of Turkey, so over 28% of the vote share. So this is how buy and sell siders are voting in our survey, is allocated towards Turkish listed entities. So you can see that this is actually quite a large percentage in comparison when you review the other regions here. What we have seen in the emerging EMEA survey, actually voter participation has increased by over 25% last year, and this year it increased further by 14%. And for us, we recognize this as an increase because of the level of participation. But what this also reflects is that IR has delivered such high standard in terms of engagement, in terms of disclosure, in terms of communication. We talked about the investor event earlier. More investor events are being hosted by companies. Again, we heard this before, control the narrative. It's a really good opportunity to control the narrative and tell the story how it should be told. But this is a really, really important metric right here. You're getting a lot more feedback from investors and sell-side analysts that you're engaging with. Voters for Turkey have actually increased by 46%. Again, that goes to show the level of engagement and interaction that you're delivering, staying on the radar and actually maintaining on the radar, which is very important. With respect to actually, it shouldn't say Polish there, but it's basically what is interesting is that with respect in terms of the context of the higher increased voter participation, we have actually seen a decline in number of companies nominated in Turkey. So this is a really, really interesting aspect, because what it's telling you is that investors are looking for quality, and they're very deliberate as part of our review process and our survey process. They're very clear about who differentiates themselves with respect to everything related to your investor relations outreach, to the quality of meetings, to the access to the C-suite, also board engagement. So we will see this in a minute as well. We see a lot more board engagement, and one key element of the quality of IR is also that you have access to board. I think this was mentioned earlier. Having a seat at the table, you actually do have a seat at the table. So we see about 9% of Turkish companies attend board meetings or interact with the board outside of the quarterly board meetings, actually daily or weekly. In fact, 24% are actually meeting with them monthly. So the access that you have with the board in this country is actually quite unparalleled and doesn't compare to other markets. So it's a really, really positive signal of how you are empowered as investor relations. Again, going back to what Oscar said, this is all about empowering IR and positioning IR as a strategic function. And having that seat at the board table is absolutely essential for you to actually shape the narrative of the company and the strategy eventually as well. This is indicating more insights around where the sector focus has been, both from the buy side and sell side. So you can see a lot more alignment year on year on the sell side, some differential here on the buy side, where you see some sectors, actually financials, have done better this year than last year. Which is very interesting. One of the key aspects or findings that we have from our research is that Turkish corporates have actually outperformed their emerging EMEA peers in 5 out of 7 sector categories. in our research. So this is a really interesting piece of information. And the sectors where UAE and Saudi have actually outperformed Turkey were actually in financials and energy. Now, in terms of best practices, and we heard some of them before, so when we think about best practices, we look at what IROs are doing, and we compare that to the market, but we also compare that against the top performing companies in emerging EMEA. So these are the #1 ranked companies, and we look at how they structure their teams. What kind of budgets do they have? How much interaction do they have with their C-suite or with their board, to be able to really have and develop a blueprint for what best practices in investor relations actually looks like. So this is the survey scope for Turkey, so you can see the level of participation, also broken down by market capitalization, so you can also understand the scope of feedback that we're able to obtain as part of this research piece. We're looking at the challenges within investor relations in Turkey. Macroeconomic is obviously an obvious one, but what is most telling and actually aligned with many other industries and regions is the targeting aspect, is the sell-side coverage, but also lack of budgets to actually do things. And we will look at budgets in a minute. To frame the next few slides, we will be looking at what the priorities really are for Turkish IR. So you can see them here. Targeting is an area that I think will forever be a challenge because it's not a science, it's an art form. It's something where you need to access data, and there's some brilliant service providers here that will actually support targeting initiatives, but you also need to incorporate your qualitative understanding of who you want to target. Not all money is equal, and I think there's a lot of onus now on investor relations to actually determine who are the type of investors that you should be engaging with, who are the type of investors that you want C-suite to be spending time with. So it's a really important aspect, and this is something that I would challenge you and also encourage you to really focus on doing that for more efficient and for more effective outcomes. We will also be looking at engagement, and we will compare that again, Turkey versus emerging EMEA, but also versus the top performing companies in our research. And we will also look at investor events. So this is an ever-growing area, and I think Rebecca mentioned it earlier as well. Now, in terms of team structure, it's always really exciting to see finance will forever, I think, be the key element in terms of, I guess, career profile or profile of candidates, and I think Oscar may be able to corroborate that. But we're also seeing much more diversity in an IR team. Looking specifically here, obviously an increase on the sell side that is now joining investor relations, but we also see in some of the top performing companies, we see people from the buy side, from operations, and from strategy joining investor relations, and more increasingly also corporate communication. You basically have to be jack of all trades if you want to be in an IR team, and you have to be able to allocate resources into different areas within the IR scope as it obviously evolves. Remuneration and budgets is always a big thing. So this is always an area I think that needs to be benchmarked against. So you can see some obviously of the top performing companies in pink on the screen. You know, some of them don't actually have big budgets. So big budgets doesn't necessarily always equal good performance or good quality performance. So it's important to understand that. So I think for IR, it's really important to be focused, to be effective in the way that you're doing your work and work smartly. And that's why I think targeting shareholder ID, these are all things that allow you to be much more focused in your engagement and identifying as well your pain points. This is important, and this is kind of setting the benchmark. I think this is something, you know, and I hope TÜYİD, I'm sure, will be sharing the slides later on. But you can see roughly where you sit here as Turkish IR in terms of the number of engagements. So you can see clearly that the top performing companies have actually on average much higher frequency of engagement and interaction across all these different platforms of communication and interaction, whether it's unique one-on-one meetings, whether it is actually company-organized events, or sell-side conferences. So this is, you know, the benchmark. This is the minimum that you need to work towards and ensure that you have those kind of engagements on your radar. Investor events, also very important. We heard it earlier, so we're not talking necessarily capital markets days that are taking 1 or 2 days. This is something that is a lot more dynamic, that is a lot more thematic, that is more product-led, that is really focused on your innovation, on your growth stories, on your growth areas, something specific that you want to educate your investor community on. And it's become much more frequent than in previous years, but a really important platform for you to also introduce C-1, C-2, business leaders within your business to actually speak to market and to share their story and their information about their businesses. The clock is running down. So a few more seconds. The last slide, targeting new markets. So we're seeing also much greater levels of efforts in terms of identifying new investment opportunities. So we've seen this within the top-ranked companies, slightly less in Turkey, actually. So we see 59% of the top-ranked companies have actually targeted new investor markets and new pockets of capital. Much less so that we're seeing in the rest of emerging EMEA and Turkey. They're focused on rest of the world, largely around Singapore, around China, Taiwan, Japan as well. So these are the areas where the focus has been within rest of the world. But this is also important, and this is part of your targeting strategy to consider. I'm going to drop the Gen AI. I wanted for our upcoming survey just give you some heads up as we're changing the research methodology. Previously, it was company-led, so investors and sell side would actually enter the names of the companies. What we're now doing to actually get even more differentiated feedback is we're doing it attribute-led. So that means for every attribute that you've seen on the screen earlier, they have to name their top 3 companies. So for each attribute. So it's going to be quite extensive and really valuable in terms of, again, identifying where the pain points are, identifying where the potential opportunities are, and the areas that you need to actually allocate more resources and address moving forward. And these are just the dates for you to actually review. You can take a screenshot of that. So the dates for the next survey, 26th of January, when the buy side and sell side will be, again, assessing you. And I think TÜYID is also sending out some communication with respect to that. And please already complete your corporate survey, so we have information on that. And yeah, thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this useful. And if you have any questions, do let me know. But yeah, onwards to the awards now, I think. Thank you.